Hey there, I'm Josh, and I just completed a project I've been working on for a while now, which is a digital camera I've built called the CMRA Digital Imager, based around a Raspberry Pi on the inside, featuring a 3D printed body, a top view screen, and then a back e-paper display, all together in a waist-level fashion camera. And I feel like it's been quite a project overall. I've learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, and I wanted to go through some of the history of it over the past 3 years, some of the things that I had to figure out, and then also show some images and give some overall thoughts and impressions about what it's been like both to make and shoot this camera. So please stick around and check it out. To start off, I want to give a quick tour of the camera body itself and how everything's laid out, starting with the lens up front, which is a 14mm f2.8 manual lens, EF mounted to the C-mount sensor, which is the Sony high-resolution sensor, which is available for the Raspberry Pi. Moving past that, you have the sensor mount and then the main camera body here. The body itself is all something that I designed for being 3D printed. It's in multiple segments that can come apart so it can be easily operable, because I knew I would have to do a lot of changes and do a lot of debugging with that. You'll see on this side you have your dial, which is used to control all your settings, and a media cover, which covers up and allows access to the USB where all the images are stored. Moving over to the other side, you have your shutter button up top with some nice little branding on the side, and a charging port down below. There's a USB battery inside, which has 2 outputs, one that goes to the Raspberry Pi, which is in the middle here, and then one that goes up to the top display here, which is a 4.2-inch screen which displays the live view from the sensor. And in the back here you have your e-paper display, which has all the settings controls for the camera itself. Altogether, the 3D printed body and the waist level design come together in a unique shooting experience, which is a bit slower, but it really motivates you to take your time and to come up with some images that have some unique character that you might not see otherwise. Now, as a quick walkthrough of the actual camera experience itself, you'll turn it on using the power button, which is hidden in this circular area up front in the mounting plate, which connects to the USB battery inside. That'll go ahead and start up the boot up sequence and sending power both to the Raspberry Pi and the top screen. I just have it running through the regular Raspberry Pi booting sequence, and then it'll load up the app shortly. You'll see it already is logged in, and we'll pull that up as the back screen is being initialized. And then within a couple seconds, you're ready to go and ready to start shooting. Once the camera is fully booted up, you'll start seeing your live display at the top screen, and you'll also be able to start fully controlling all the settings in the back here using your radial dial on the side here. You can see that you have a selection. Right now we're on ISO, and we can go between all the different settings as we turn the radial dial, and it'll update to your locations. So you can start with ISO, exposure compensation, white balance, and whenever you want to change something, you can just fully press, and then it will go ahead and select it so you can make a change. Now if we scroll, you'll see it'll go to something like a sunny daylight balance, where it'll reflect those white balance changes as any other camera would. You can go through several different settings to make sure it's reflective of the lighting conditions that you're in. Following that white balance, you have an exposure mode, which I usually just leave in auto. If you go ahead and select drive mode, that'll give you a couple different options there, where you can have a single shot, full resolution PNG file by default. Then if you go up to the next option, you have a multi-shot mode, which will take 3 JPEGs back to back to get you a little bit of motion, and you can put it together in something like kind of a fun retro GIF, really leaning into that early digital camera lo-fi aesthetic, which is kind of fun, I think. And then you also will go into your timer modes, which will go between 1 second, 5 second, and 10-second intervals, where you can put it on a tripod and get something more timed out or take a self-portrait. They're a little bit small in the GUI, but they're still good options to keep in mind. Following that, you have your play mode, which you can go ahead and view back your images. However, whenever you take an image, it will freeze the top screen for a couple seconds, so you have a lot of time to review that, and that's usually what I use. But then following that, you have your focus magnification, where if you press it, you'll see it'll actually crop in your screen a little bit so you can better view what you're doing for the manual focus. Since everything here is manual, you don't have any autofocus or anything like that, unfortunately. But then after that, you just have your power cycle, which you do need to do manually on the Pi first via software before just shutting off the power, or that'll leave the e-ink display on, which is not what you want, and it also just is not that good for the Pi. Then you have some different film emulation settings like filmic and posterize and those types of things if you want to do any sort of effects. And then you have a recording section, which never ended up being fully completed, but I had enough problems getting this functional as it was, and I figured that maybe I'll just go back and do a different video-centric camera at another time. But overall, that's the whole software experience and the shooting experience, which you need to be able to change your settings and go out and take photos with the digital imager. So once you have all your settings dialed in, then you'll be able to go out and take your photos. It is definitely a little bit of a slower experience given that e-paper display and the speed at which it updates. However, I think it still kind of adds value to the experience of being able to be very slow and deliberate with this kind of larger physical object of a camera. And you can just take it slow and enjoy the process and come out with photos that look unique and kind of feature that low fidelity aesthetic of those early digital cameras, which give it a character and flair that you might not see in other places. So as a bit of backstory for the project, I had a Raspberry Pi from back in college, but I didn't really have a use for it. But then when I saw they announced the Sony high-resolution sensor for that Pi, I figured, hey, I really like cameras and camera body designs. It would be really fun to try to build something around that. I had seen in research a couple different projects, like trying to put a Raspberry Pi into an old film camera body and, kind of digitizing it, or doing a couple things like that, or even doing something with a security measure. But I didn't see something that was really a standalone full camera body design, which could be controlled and had real settings and didn't need external power. And I figured that it would be a really fun, unique way to try and bring together some of my background with a little bit of software and a lot of 3D design stuff, and try to bring it together in something that I could use and enjoy shooting and come up with unique images. With that, it ended up taking about 43 different source file variations to get to this final version, or at least semi-final version. Started off, I tried a lot of different things. I tried going with a top handle, seeing how that would feel, especially for the controls. I thought what I was going to be able to do is just use the top display for everything and just maybe have a back button board that would have some physical buttons that you could press. But then I discovered that with just given the amount of things I had to cram inside here and the space I had to work with me keeping it a manageable size, that was going to be way too much work. But with that, that led me to finding the e-paper display and finding out that it could be powered from the Pi and not need an external HDMI output to it, but just have everything using those existing pins, and that it could really simplify things inside. So I ended up using that and coming up with the final product that you see here. Now, as far as software goes, I had a bit of a background with it where I had some experience from using a Raspberry Pi back in college, and then also I have experience using C# for work, but all the same I knew that something like this would take a lot of extra work and research. I definitely leaned heavily on the existing Raspberry Pi camera libraries and actually reading the sensor and getting all that data, since I knew I couldn't go that in depth, but I really wanted to build an app around it that would work for my purposes and again use the actual hardware that I had with the radial dial and the shutter button and all that. There were some apps out there that did some things and did a little bit of UI, but again, this needed a total kind of ground up approach, and it was really fun learning how to do that and putting things together. It of course took a lot of different problem solving and a lot of different iterations where I thought things were completed and then I went back and I ended up having to do a lot more design, but still it was a really beneficial experience, and I feel like I learned a lot working with Python and just working with the Raspberry Pi where I could apply it to other projects, which I thought was a neat takeaway. With all those aspects coming together, I was finally able to go out and take some different sample photos, go on a few different shoots, and see how it all felt coming together. I really tried to lean in again to that whole photo process of what it means to take a photo, of being deliberate, and just having fun with it, and knowing that the images are never going to be super sharp or super incredible, but that they're going to have a little bit of character just given the sensor and the glass and give you something that you wouldn't get otherwise in something kind of clean and clinical like a phone camera. And I really enjoyed that. As far as ending thoughts, definitely learn to appreciate online education and just making sure you take the time and be deliberate and try to solve problems and don't just brute force it like I have a tendency to do, but also lean on your friends. My buddy Wes really helped me rebuild my 3D printer early on when I was having a ton of issues with it. That was a huge help. And my friends Ayo and Sam really helped me kind of work through some of the different software approaches while still allowing me to really kind of do the work myself. And of course my brother John being an actual software engineer, helping me think through some things, which is also a big help. So leaning on friends and using online education and not being afraid to keep going and not give up even when things get really difficult and you have to kind of start from scratch or redo a whole lot of processes. So at the end of the day, this is the camera that I ended up with. It's certainly not perfect, it's pretty slow and a little bit clunky, but I do feel like it has character and is something fun, especially for me to take out and take photos with. And I feel like it speaks to a larger photographic discussion about not pursuing cleanliness and clinical detail, but more about enjoying whatever camera you have and looking for fun and unique ways to capture and tell new stories. As far as the future of this project and where I might go from here, I'm honestly not sure. I've put a lot of time into this, so I just kind of let it breathe and maybe focus on other options or other avenues of creative endeavors. But I might go back and do a video-related camera. I've also considered doing different bodies with the same innards where you can kind of swap things out, and I think that would also be fun to explore different photographic experiences with the same overall platform inside. But at the end of the day, it was still something that I can come away with and be happy with that I finished. But anyways, thank you so much for taking the time to check out this video and see a bit of the story behind this project. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great one. Thanks.